So, my name's Jon Goodbun. I co-run a small architecture practice called WAG, Working Architecture Group. Also teach at a few London schools and around the country, teaching design and history and theory. Also have a consultancy looking at systems, holistic systems thinking in general, called MOS, and write for the architectural press and so on. I learn the language of business, but do not be restricted by the business mindset. So I guess that's kind of interesting because it expands the notion of design to not simply be designing objects, but to be designing processes and designing business plans and so on. And it also raises the question of how to start to evolve the business processes of capitalism into either a new stage of capitalism or into something altogether different. So it's crucial for designers, I guess, to be able to think in those terms, to be designing business plans, and designing business plans is ultimately designing societies. I mean, I would see ecology as being the root of the word. I'm sure it's been quoted by a few people, but ecology is the study of making homes and the study of making economies. The Greek root is the same. And so as designers, if you're designing ecologies, you're thinking about natural systems, but you're designing homes and you're designing economies. Okay, so C2 is encourage a shift in perceptions by showing the diversity of value-added outcomes of sustainable design, including economic as well as non-materialistic benefits. So I guess what's intended by that, the way in which value is produced in society at the moment, the way in which design produces value, and the way in which you discuss that just in an everyday sense with clients. A straightforward example I could give was a job that we've got about to start on site quite soon for a house in Hackney. And when we were first approached by the client, it's a job where she has a house and there's some garages next door, and she asked us to have a look at it. And her initial interest was only, reasonably in the sense of it was just how to develop the garages and make a bit of money for her retirement or whatever. But we started having a conversation with her about what the potential of it would be, about how it might cost a bit more to do a sustainable house, but how in the long run that would have greater value, but equally how that would help her to market it at this stage, which has already been the case. So it's enabled her to have quite a unique product to sell in a sense, and there's already been quite a bit of interest in people who'd be interested in buying it, even though it hasn't been built yet. And so in that way, that's how design can act as a critical education tool in society as a whole. So this woman was an education consultant, and undoubtedly this just greater ability to talk about value and the way in which it's produced in society has been taken into very different areas which have got nothing immediately to do with house design. Well, the principles are useful things for schools to discuss or for designers to discuss. It's the kind of thing where because it's not it needs discussion and thinking about. It's not a straightforward set of points in a sense, and so it's the kind of thing which, on the one hand, you could imagine, just using this as sort of, showing it to students and saying, well, how do you think we could incorporate this into this year's work? Or equally, it's the kind of thing you could use with clients. Education would be a key way of changing the way that people think. It means, and that can work in a few ways. That can be education actually being much more critical of society once again. but equally it can be education getting much more involved in society. So, for example, design schools actually putting in place some of the infrastructure which governments have retreated from in recent years. Because a lot of that infrastructure in a network and information-based society is informational, and so educational institutions are potentially in a well positioned to create informational infrastructure. I mean, at the moment, architectural education it's dealing with sustainability in a very superficial way. It's actually surprisingly allowed the sustainability agenda to be almost completely determined by how the profession defines sustainability, which has been largely to do with talking about carbon emissions reduction in a fairly, important but superficial ways. And this is because the schools themselves have been afraid to confront the question. It's inevitably because the schools are largely, there are lots of people teaching there who haven't confronted the question of ecology and sustainability in their work, and who are possibly not particularly well positioned to do it. The schools are set up as ways of allowing, they've tended to promote the superstar designer still, and that's, that feeds a certain part of the profession, building buildings for the city or Dubai or whatever, but it doesn't really confront the question of designing the built environment in how the built environment is being produced under capitalism at the moment, and how that needs to change, and the responsibilities that architecture schools might have in imagining completely different ways of producing the built environment. I just recommend everyone to read more Marx. I think ultimately, if we're going to get to grips with the question of I'm paraphrasing David Harvey, and I'd recommend everyone looks at David Harvey's website and his reading of Marx's Capital, which is a very enjoyable introduction to it. And ultimately, to paraphrase Harvey, if we're going to make a shift towards sustainability, we need to confront the question of value production in capitalism, and Marx gives us some of the most powerful tools to do that.